read all about it. It's the Weekly Crumbs.
Hello everyone and welcome back to What a Barb, a Polin podcast. I'm Obs and today I am joined by my lovely Lecky. As we wrap up our 2024, we're going to take a little bit of a look back across the past year because what a year, Lecky. Oh my word.
Yeah.
We're going to have a little look back across our whistle ups of the year. We're going to reminisce a little. And you know what, Lek? We might even share some season's greetings from days gone by.
How exciting.
But how are you, Lecky? It is very early for me. So if you notice a husk in my voice.
It's been an interesting time. I've had a decent... No, I haven't.
That just sums up everyone's 2024. I've had a decent... And then you think, and you're like, actually, forget it.
Yeah. I'm recovering from a recent bout of food poisoning, so my Thanksgiving wasn't super fun.
I don't know what's wrong with the Americans. They're always getting food poisoning.
On the plus side, I just went to see Better Than Ezra in concert with my husband, and that was really fun.
Oh my God, I love Better Than Ezra. I didn't know that's who you're going to see.
You?
Yeah.
My husband was telling me that it's one of Taylor Swift's favorite bands for some reason.
Yes, which I think back in I don't know, 2010 or whenever,
yeah,
she covered them and that's how I found out about them.
Oh, interesting. Breathless, maybe?
Yeah, she sang Breathless. When was that? Does it say?
2011? 2010, maybe?
I've been in the trenches a while with Taylor.
It was fun.
I didn't know that's who you'd seen. I'm so glad. And happy Thanksgiving for whenever Thanksgiving was.
You've had a time of it also. I'm recovering from food poisoning. You are recovering from a concussion.
The health of the podcast continues to decline on an hourly basis, to be honest with you. Yes. So some of the things we talk about later, we ideally would have wanted to bring to you slightly sooner than we are.
Yeah, we've been suffering.
But yeah, I fell down the stairs and had to go to hospital with a concussion.
Her coworkers had to force her.
Yeah.
But yeah, the symptoms weren't promising.
The symptoms were concerning, to be honest with you.
So it's probably a good idea. She couldn't remember what day it was.
Yeah, so a concussed obs does not a good podcaster make. That's what happened to me. Lucky, I injure myself so often. And the first person I always tell is you.
Yes, it was, I don't remember what time it was, but I was very concerned. I was worried that you'd hit your head, and you said that you didn't. But then we found out that you can get a concussion without hitting your head. Spoiler alert.
Listeners, she did. But yes, so a fun time has been had. We are well now, though. And the others are well as well. It's just they're not on the call.
Yeah.
But they send their very kindest of regards.
Yeah.
And Lecky, you have been busy in recent weeks, haven't you? Because you went on a little trip, didn't you, recently? Do you want to just drop a little hint? I mean, you don't have to drop a hint. You could just say.
I'll drop an anvil. So if you remember, I went to the Writers Guild Foundation Library back in October. And last week, my boss was kind enough to give me an extra day off with the holidays. So I thought, what else am I going to do with my day off?
So I sent her to the library. She was like, I'm not entirely sure. And then I was like, you can do whatever you like, but also here's no pressure, but a complete list of everything I need you to do.
So yeah, I've spent 2 full days in the library and now have written down a lot of notes that hopefully we'll be able to share some information with you.
You know, every time you go to the library, I just hear quotes from that episode of Doctor Who in my head.
Oh, a silence in the library?
Donna Noble has left the library. Donna Noble has been saved. Every time you go to the library, it's all I think.
Lecky has entered the library. Lecky would like to leave. No, it was really great library. I highly recommend a visit.
10 out of 10 for the library, but there's a lot of notes. And because the first time you went, you were very much concentrating on season 3, and we wanted some greetings from seasons past, did we not?
Yeah.
And I think we might have some. But first of all, Lecky, the library can wait for us for a second. I just thought, it's not our final episode of the year because I think we're definitely going to have
1 or 2 more.
Definitely one more, which we're hoping will be a little fun episode for everyone. And then we're also working on 303 rewatch, which will either come out at the end of the month or early in January. We'll get there.
Yeah, it's been a time. We've been concussed. We're recovering.
The worst thing is that because I didn't go to hospital straight away, I was working so heavily on our last episode.
Yes. So she could have died, is what they said.
The medical advice was like, when you've had a concussion, you can't do anything with your brain for the first 48 hours. And the first 48 hours, I was desperately editing away on that last episode. So I hope you enjoyed.
She's still alive. She made it.
It's not the first time this podcast almost killed me, let's be honest. So yeah, so it won't be our last episode of the year, but a momentous thing has happened to us in recent days, has it not? Beyond concussions and illnesses. And that is, of course, my dear listeners, Spotify Wrapped. Mm-hmm. We were waiting and waiting and waiting.
Yeah, this was a late release.
So I thought, Spotify Wrapped, what a nostalgic time of year. It happens to the best of us. We spend all year forgetting that Spotify Wrapped is around the corner. We play a lot of string quartets, a lot of musical soundtracks. I could never show my Spotify Wrapped to anybody except you guys because I can't explain most of it, to be honest.
I showed mine to my husband because one of my top 5 artists is one of his favorite bands, Black Lab. But then he was just embarrassed because 3 of the others were all string quartets.
Like, why did I marry her? How long did divorces take in California?
But groundbreaking news. The last 2 years, if you remember, if you've been listening to the pod.
Oh, this is sad news.
Well, it's kind of sad. It's good for me.
She's like personal growth.
But the last 2 years running, my favorite, or like my most listened to song was the cover of Chandelier from Vitamin String Quartet. And this year it was not. It was an actual song. However, Vitamin String Quartet was still my most listened to artist of the year.
As it should be. Taylor Swift and Maisie Peters continue for like the 7th or 8th year running to hold the top 2 artists in my heart. But of course, with Spotify Wrapped comes a reflection overall. So first of all, thank you for everyone who sent us their Spotify Wrapped. What an honour to appear on your Spotify Wrapped. Absolute joy. Thank you so, so much. Lecky, a couple of quick facts for you.
Okay.
We were streamed in 104 countries.
That's a lot.
I don't even know that I could name 104 countries.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could either. But I'm an American, so that's kind of expected.
And we were a top 10 show for 8,700-ish, I don't have the exact number, listeners, a top 5 show for 6.7k, and the top show for 2.93k of you wonderful, wonderful people in all of those countries, wherever you may be.
That's a lot of listeners, David. But seriously, thank you so much to everybody who listened to us. That shocked me. When I first saw the numbers, it shocked me. I can't believe that there's so many.
Here's a little crumb, a little hint for later listeners. She was shooketh. You will hear that word a few more times in this episode.
Yeah.
And Lecky, you had a Royal Course String Quartet classical pop August, did you not? What a shock.
I did. But to be honest, that's every day in my life. I find it really easy to just pop on my instrumental playlist when I'm working and it doesn't distract me.
What else happened in recent weeks, Lecky? But a massive box arrived from the United States of America. And now I'm thrilled to say that I can also listen. I mean, I also have a Spotify account. However, I am delighted to say I'm the very, very proud owner of the Bridgerton Season 3 soundtrack vinyl, in brackets, the Collins Blue Eyes edition.
Yes.
And I actually got a record player.
Oh.
So at any time of day, I can just have the dink, 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 dink. So my Spotify will not be correct for next year, but thank you so much. Lecky also sent me like insane amount of gifts from Trader Joe's.
I sent her a bunch of snacks. Yeah.
Not sponsored.
Yeah. Not sponsored.
So I'm making my way through so many American treats. And you also sent me some beautiful Polin fan art. So my heart is full. So my walls will be absolutely splayed with Polin. And then if anyone comes to visit, I'll just have to take it down because I have a double life.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Lecky, for that gift.
You're welcome.
But Lecky, here's some podcast facts for 2024. Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay, do you know how many full episodes we put out this year?
Off the top of my head, I'm going to guess something like 40?
Okay, we have 33 full episodes with 8 weekly crumbs. So you pretty much bang on, about 41. Which, when you actually consider how many weeks there are in a year.
Yeah.
And also when you consider there is a period where that number is heavily weighted on one side of the year.
Yes. And that human beings usually require sleep.
Usually is been the key word there. Yeah. And in total, not including this episode or any other episodes this month, our episode total length, this isn't for what we cut out, but for what we've put out, was 52 hours and 57 minutes of Polin this year. And our episodes have truly ranged in variety of different things. We've had breaking podcast episodes, and believe me, a breaking episode takes a lot of disruption to our life schedule, about Colin being spotted in a cup of tea.
Yeah, I remember that.
Polin being spotted next to some Italian biscuits. One of my personal favourites.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
That was the first time we ever saw them together.
Oh, yeah, that was lovely. That was fun.
We've obviously had trailer reactions, promo analysis at every bloody turn, reactions to the actual episodes. Incomprehensible that they actually dropped this year. We had at some point a full book reread of Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which we timed to the day to mark the 200-year anniversary of the story, was just thrown in amongst all of that.
Yeah, and we didn't want to do it, but it ended up being some of my favorite episodes to record because we just went silly with it. So hopefully you enjoyed those.
And then, of course, we had season 3 reactions, season 4 crumbs.
Yes.
Also had interviews with Archer Marsh and James Swoon. We've even managed to begin our season 3 rewatch. This time last year, I think all that had dropped was that photo of Elle and Pen in Jen's shop. I don't think we'd had anything else.
I don't think that had even come out yet. That was later in December, wasn't it? Or at least a week or two from now.
Let me see. Just the state of the Polin Nation this time last year and how much has changed. Oh my God, you're so right. The EW article wasn't until the 20-something of December. I thought it was way earlier.
Yep.
This time last year, we hadn't even got the release date.
Nope. That was later.
The release date was on, well, depending on when we put the episode out, it was either on the 11th or 12th of December. This time last year, we had literally no idea what was going on.
Clueless.
How things have changed. And we just finished our season 2 rewatch. So, if you've listened to any of our episodes, thanks a lot, guys.
Well done.
Also, so much love to everyone who isn't on Spotify, whether you're on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, of course, Audible, any of those, wherever you are. Hello. We love you.
Yes, thank you so much, all of you. Also, just on this topic, I was rewatching, I think I was looking for a quote, but our trailer reaction video, and I did not sleep putting that together, and I was trying to make it special. So I had like little stupid effects and stuff, and I think there was one point where, there might have been actually a couple points where I messed up the effect, like there was an arrow, and it's like completely pointing in the wrong place. But literally, if you watch that and you're like, why the fuck is there an arrow there? It's because I hadn't slept in like 2 days, and I was trying to make it special.
But apparently that was our most listened to episode, so it clearly went down a treat.
Yeah, hopefully you forgave me if you saw that.
So thank you. And of course, huge thank you to our Patreon members who have made all our most recent episodes completely possible. What a year, Lecky. Any top memories?
Top memories.
I can't remember most of it. It's been a lot. Another wrapped stat was that our podcast was my top listened to podcast.
It was mine also. But it's just because we take quality control very seriously on the pod. We're kind of anal.
Or have to go back and check what we talked about at a certain point.
In fact, all of my 3 were Bridgerton because the third one was the Bridgerton official podcast. And number 2 for me was Fix and Rex, which is the Bridgerton Polin fan fiction podcast, which I also highly recommend.
Absolutely. So, Lecky, thank you for being one of our top listeners. It really means a lot. But yeah, any favourite memories from the past 12 months of your life?
The trailer was so hectic, so I don't know if that was my favorite. I would say the remarkable shade of blue era because we were able to plan for that, and there was excitement, and it was kind of like our first glimpse of Polin in movement, and it was just great. Yeah,
the little glimpses we got really early on before promo fully opened, when they just started appearing over the world in odd contexts, like in the cup of tea or light on the biscuits. And of course, Lecky, all the fun of waiting for things that didn't happen, like when we scheduled so much time to do that sneak peek reaction.
You took 2 days off of work for the sneak peek, which ended up being the Cantony clip.
I've never seen Lecky so actually angry as not getting a Polin clip as that moment.
I don't know if it was angry, but it definitely wasn't what I expected. And if you go back and watch that or listen to it, I mentioned my husband even texted me to offer his condolences because he also went and looked it up because he wanted to see if it lived up to the hype because I was so excited.
We thought it was going to be a trailer.
Yeah.
It's all part of the fun. And it was finally the year of Polin, Lecky. Of course, we had season 3. Yes. It was also the 200th anniversary of book Polin, as we were saying earlier.
Yep.
Can you believe it actually came out this year?
It was good timing, I guess.
There we go. It's happened. Season 3 is with us. And what an incredible year. What a ride, as Netflix would say. So to celebrate, this little trip down memory lane. And since you've been so recently to the library, in many ways, mentally, emotionally, you're always going to be in that library, aren't you, Lucky, really? Paying an insane amount for parking.
Yes. Okay, sorry. They have free parking on Thursdays and Fridays. So the first time I went, I tried to go on, I think it was a Thursday. But when I got there, they told me they were replacing the gate for their parking instruction. They're like, you can park here, but you will be stuck until the end of day. And I was like, well, I don't want to be trapped. So I moved and parked in this like shopping center called the Grove, which is nearby, and ended up paying an extraordinary amount for parking. And I ended up staying until the end of day anyway. So that was kind of a waste of money. But anyway, it is what it is. It was worth it. I would pay to go back again.
Well, shall we have some season's greeting from Friends Gone By?
Yes.
Should we start with season 1? What did you find? What did you dig up for us?
I will say when I'm flipping through, I tried to look for cut scenes and cut dialogue and stuff like that because it always really interests me. So there was a cut scene from episode 103 before the You Must Marry Your Dearest Friend conversation. There's a really cute like sibling interaction between Leila Cohan and Ben where they're having this really fun debate about Byron because apparently Lady Whistledown reviewed Byron's latest book and she didn't really have nice things to say about it, but Elle says she might read it anyway, and Colin was kind of like playfully teasing her about whether she kind of had a crush on Byron, and of course Benedict, we know, hates Byron, so he goes off on and says like, if you like self-satisfied, well-traveled, accomplished types.
And Colin's like, that's my entire...
Yeah, he's like...
That's my entire lifestyling, actually.
I do indeed, yeah. And then we learned that Byron and Benedict were at Cambridge together, and Benedict has to like correct Colin and says, actually, he was 2 years ahead of Byron. So then Colin and Elle are kind of playfully asking him what he's done with his 2-year head start. And Colin pretends to defend Benedict by saying he's cut his hair and changed the cut of his jackets. So all in all, he hasn't really done much. And then Benedict throws something at Colin, which we see as a charcoal pencil, which was initially the hint that he was first interested in art. So it was a really cute little moment.
Oh, I love that. You know how I feel about the little sibling moments.
Yeah, it's cute. And speaking of the dearest friend scene, there was no reaction from Colin in the scene description, but surprisingly, Anthony nodded in agreement. So apparently he liked that bit of advice.
I love that then he went to embark on enemies to lovers instead.
Yeah.
He was like, oh, you know, it'd be a great trope for me.
Yeah.
And then just went to war instead.
Yeah.
And then the first time you went to the library, we were like, you need to hit all the QCs. And we were listing frantically like everything we needed to. And the one thing, listeners, we absolutely did not remember about was the What a Barb scene. Incredible. Well done.
Yes. As I was walking back to my car, she's like, wait, what about the What a Barb scene? I was like, fuck, I've already left.
Oh, shit. You were able to go back and find it. So how is our namesake doing, Lecky? Because listeners, if you remember, in 104, you have that shot where Penelope is watching and sort of empathizing with Marina as she's dancing with Rutledge. And then, of course, infamously, Colin creeps up behind her, leans in and says, our house looks a bit fussy. Do you think if he goes to bed, we all have to leave? And they have the incredible exchange that ends with Colin saying, Penelope, what a barb. What's going on between the two of them, Lecky?
So it says, pen flushes red as Colin looks at her, seriously impressed. It is perhaps the longest Colin has looked at her, and it feels good. Good in italics.
It's a whole 5 seconds, listeners. We've counted.
But then, against her will, her eyes rack to Marina, who is spun back into the foreground by Rutledge.
And the scene resumes as it does in the show. Mm-hmm. But I love that. It's like seriously impressed.
Yes.
And he just stares at her.
Yeah. And then I love there's a little bit afterward where she's watching Colin dance with Marina and it says, Pen watches her moment lost and now this.
Oh.
Yeah.
Pen, my darling. And there's also a little Marina Pen moment, as we know, after the ball.
Yeah.
When Marina's like, he'll be such a great dad.
And then we'll be sisters. So reading back through season 1, they gave a lot of attitude to Penelope in the scene description. So in that scene, they say, Penelope is in hell, but she keeps her poker face.
And there's also a little cut Marina Penelope moment, isn't there, from, I think, was it the same episode or was this episode 5?
This is episode 5. It's the Marina Hates Tomatoes episode. And it's right before the Marina Hates Tomatoes because you can actually see a picture, a still of this cut scene in an old Entertainment Weekly article or something like that. And they're in the same outfits. But basically, Portia has dragged all of her daughters and Marina out on a promenade because she hopes to like bump into Rutledge and force Marina to interact with him. And Marina really doesn't like that idea. So Marina says, does Colin Bridgerton not enjoy a morning ride? I was hoping to see him here. And Penelope says, We must have missed him. How sad. And I could just totally hear Nicola saying it as I was reading it with her season 1 Penelope kind of like bratty voice.
Does Colin Bridgerton not enjoy a morning ride?
Apparently he really likes riding by Penelope's house.
Well, we'll see how it goes in 308 as well for him. 308 listeners, that's the only place we'll turn you to.
Speaking of the Marina hates tomatoes scene, in that scene, after Marina argues that she does indeed love tomatoes, it says, but Penelope is not about to give up on cock blocking. And then, of course, it goes into the grease conversation.
Well, I guess Eloise cock blocking them in season 2 is just cosmic payback, Pen.
Yeah.
You can't complain.
Yeah.
Oh, so one thing I was interested in, Lecky, was the heartbreaking opening of 106 when Colin announces his engagement to everybody.
Yes.
We've always wondered exactly
what the characters were thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, whether Violet was looking at Pen or anything like that. Just a little bit more insight. Do you have the answers for us?
So I have a couple reactions. It says that Anthony was darkly glaring.
What's new?
Portia, smug as ever. Pen, of course, completely shattered.
Oh, my Pen. Give a girl a break.
And Violet was frozen on the spot.
Completely taken by surprise. And there was a little bit of cut dialogue, just a little moment between Colin and Anthony, the confrontation they have after that announcement.
Yes, so there's some cut dialogue where, during that conversation, where Colin says, the fact that you are not serious at 8 and 20 does not mean I cannot know my own mind at 19. I have no need of an opera singer to distract me from my responsibilities. I'm a grown man, whether you view me as one or not.
So that adds into that friction that exists a lot in season 1 between the two brothers. The tension where Colin is significantly younger than his older brother, but he's like, well, my life's a little bit more scared than yours. I mean, he gave it a go. But it does lean into the fact that Colin is young. Even when he marries Pen, he's pretty young. And I think this is interesting because this is, in a way, going to come into play in season 4 when Benedict, who is also significantly older than Colin, looks at his younger brother, who by that point in season 4 is a grown man and has set up this life for himself. And he reflects on that to propel his own story. So I thought that's an interesting little moment. You know, we were a big fan of that Colin-Anthony dynamic in season 1. So interesting.
And spoiler alert, there's another really great cut moment between them in season 2, which we'll get to.
And the other moment I was interested in later in 106, the engagement dinner from hell, as it is known, the scene between Colin and Pen, you really are very good. You know that. Did you get any little extra insights? Nothing was cut there, but anything extra you want to share with the crowds?
So Penelope, when she's telling him, the scene description says, Pen can't tell him everything. She won't ruin Marina, but she had to do something. And of course, she eventually does go on to ruin Marina. But in this moment,
she's still trying not to.
Yeah, it wasn't her intention. And so then after Colin says, we understand each other, it says, Penelope wants to scream, but then she glimpses Marina approaching and falls silent.
So what wasn't scripted, and this is something we'll have a little discussion about a bit later, I think, about how the script is one part of the storytelling and it's not the whole story. And all these different elements come into play, like set location, set design, even direction, lighting, the relationship between an actor and a director and how they also create the story. So script is the starting point almost. But I really like that in that scene, what isn't included in the script is that moment that Colin looks at Penelope for a beat after Marina interrupts them.
Oh, yeah.
And so I wondered if that would be in the script, but that was something that clearly was brought to life by the director and Luke Newton, sort of working where you can see that there's a curiosity still in Colin's face that looks like the conversation
isn't finished.
He knows there's something else there, even if he's not really believing it at the moment.
Yeah, and even the moment when he touches Penelope just out of sight of camera, that is not on the page. So obviously that's something that Luke and Nicola invented for their characters, or discussed with the director ahead of time.
I think that got brought up in Australia series and promo as well. That moment that they had decided that even if you can't really see it on the screen, they have that moment of physical connection, which is really interesting in the context of it's Colin trying to placate her and not listening to her, but they have this moment of touch between the two of them. He's always touching her in season 1, season 2.
Yeah.
And speaking of Colin and Lady Whistledown, I was really interested in a few little details around the revelation. So when Colin walks down the stairs at the end of 106, do we have a little reaction?
It says, and off Colin's shocked AF realization. another cutscene from season 1. There's a cutscene with Daphne where she assists with Joanna's birth, and Joanna is that villager who's pregnant, if you remember the village with the pigs.
How could I forget?
Anyway, she assists with Joanna's birth. That's what incites her to basically have that moment with Simon later on where she decides not to let him pull out. It's literally right after. So that's why it's the inciting driving force for that moment. In 107, when Colin is sad in bed in his yellow sheets.
Excellent moment. Not for Colin, but for us.
Excellent acting. Production design.
Excellent sheets. Excellent tear.
So context, there's actually a maid knocking on the door in the beginning of the scene in the script. But it says, Colin lays fully clothed on his bed, staring at the ceiling, ignoring the knock, heartsick.
I wonder what the maid wanted.
To report about staffing issues. I don't know.
Maybe she was like, excuse me, sir, I need to talk to you about the staffing issues. And Colin's like,
5 footmen just quit and we're really short-staffed. Or the footman who saw Anthony and Sienna go at it against the tree has decided to quit. We need a new footman.
Look, there are some traumatized footmen in that household. We know this.
Yes.
And then speaking of 107, such an interesting episode, especially for Colin, I think. He spends so much of the episode grappling, and just after what we call the war cabinet scene, where everyone else is deciding Colin's fate as they deal with scandal, he obviously heads off to his bedroom, and he has that scene between him and Daphne, which is something I really love, because it's always interesting to see how Colin deals with, and this will become so pertinent in season 3 as well, with how Colin deals with his anger and with his shock. And here he retreats away and Daphne goes to see him. Do you have any interesting tidbits about this scene, Lecky?
So the opening of that scene is a little bit different. So when Daphne enters originally, Colin says, if the swim from Abydos to Sestos is scarcely a mile, with practice, I should manage it, I rather think.
Bless his little soul.
Yeah.
Because he's being so serious. But we always used to rib him about being like, I bet he was going to go and attempt it, because historically, Lord Byron, a hero of Colin's and Penn's.
Apparently, yeah.
And not of Ben's. He was a bit of a hero in Greece, and he actually went to Greece and did this swim from Abydos to Sestos. And we always used to joke that Colin would try to be like Byron and go and repeat the swim on his travels. And he actually was planning on it.
He was thinking about it, yeah.
But I think it's interesting because he was drowning in that moment, and he's telling a story of someone who did drown. And I love the script is Daphne eyes him. She's like,
Yeah, are you sure about that?
Don't go doing that. And I think there's a little bit of dialogue extra there as well, isn't there, Lecky?
Yes. So Daphne says, I can only begin to imagine how difficult this is for you, Colin. And Colin says, however difficult it is for me, think how difficult it is for Miss Thompson. And Daphne says, I shall think nothing of Miss Thompson for fear that I will think something unkind towards her. Colin says, you do not know her. And Daphne says, neither, it appears, did you.
Oh, bless him. I think that's so Colin that even in his most heartbroken, painful moments, he always puts the feelings of others first. He's so sensitive to the pain of those around him, even Marina, who's completely wronged him in this moment. And of course, as we're moving from 107 to 108, we don't really see Penn and Colin directly interact with one another in the show, do we? And so we leave them where the last time they spoke in the show was 106, when Colin sort of was like, there, Penn, everything's all good. And they don't really reconnect again until the catch and toast scene.
Right.
But there is, in the original script, an extra little beat that adds into the narrative, isn't there, Lecky?
Yeah, there's a little cut Polin scene. It's right after she's having the chat with Eloise about Lady Whistledown, and she says that she will take the back stairs because she kind of hinting that she knows how to sneak in and out of the house without being seen. And actually, as she's taking the back stairs, she runs into Colin, and there's this really cute little moment between them. It says, as Penn moves down the hall toward the back stairs, only she rounds a corner and comes face to face with Colin! Colin and Penn gape at each other a moment, neither knowing what to say, both horribly embarrassed about their last interaction over Marina. Only Colin is too proud and Penn is too scared to say anything more. As they quickly move past each other, Penn looks back at him, and then she turns around, continuing. Only now Colin looks back at her, and then he turns around, continuing. Off Penn, hearing the hard close of Colin's door as she flees.
Oh.
It's so cute.
It is a great scene.
I just love it. It's very like a little rom-com moment. So I thought maybe they didn't want to give too much away about where Penn and Colin's storyline was going to end up, because like the whole thing of them glancing back at each other when the other one isn't looking
and just missing each other
is very rom-com. And in the scene right before this, there's also some cut dialogue with Eloise where Penelope makes a quip about how rifling through papers may be more interesting than sorting through ball dress fabrics, which I found kind of funny because in season 2 she ends up hiding her Lady Whistledown issues in dress fabrics.
Of course she does. So, of course, in 108, we have the catch and toast scene, which is such a beloved moment. And I think that cut moment that you were just talking about with Pen and Colin adds to the story because you can feel that tension in 108 in the catch and toast scene. But I also think without this scene, you still understand the awkwardness between the two of them that ultimately leads to the assuredly, fervently, loudly scenes. So although I would have liked this little moment with them on the stairs, I still think the show did a good job of connecting those two moments without it. So what on earth was going on during Catch and Toast?
Well, I will just say really quickly that I think it was a good job to cut it because it almost makes these other interactions at the Hastings Ball and the Catch and Toast scene feel more awkward. It kind of heightens that tension between them, leading up to the moment where Penelope almost confesses her love to him. So I think that's why they cut it.
We're waiting for them to properly see each other because they don't talk in Catch and Toast. Yeah. And so it's just their sort of building. Instead of it having that crescendo of them actually running into each other and actually being forced face to face, they have to sort of work around each other.
We talked about this in some of our past episodes, but just like as a reminder, a lot of these cuts and revisions were made with intentionality and with the intention to improve the story and pacing and also kind of the character journeys. So I thought that in particular was a smart cut.
Yeah, absolutely. But how is our dear Catch and Toast?
Okay.
My song of the year, to be honest. My song of every year.
Yeah. Also the Beans edition. But it says, angle on Penelope entering, stopping at the door because Colin singing, and Pen, it says Colin ellipsis, singing ellipsis, and Pen's about to faint right then and there, especially now because, this is all in italics, Colin's looking right at her when Eloise is suddenly pulling her to the side. Of course, the cock blocking coming back to haunt her.
Oh, would I have to say what a beautiful interpretation the two of them did in the show?
I know.
Of that moment.
I know.
I think it's so layered in the show, that tension between them and the yearning and Colin's voice catching. This moment was translated gorgeously in the show. And speaking of the assuredly, fervently, loudly, got any crumbs for us?
Yes. So as they arrive at the Hastings Ball, it says, as Benedict and Colin move through the crowd, Colin suddenly stops, catching sight of Penelope, hugging a wall per usual. She looks over at him before quickly looking away. Colin takes a beat, then he finally approaches. Colin says later on, he says, I have something I wish to tell you as well, Pen. And after that line, it says, and Pen and we can barely breathe, until, of course, he says that he's going to go.
I am leaving.
Yeah.
Another classic Colin line.
And then after his little speech there, it says, Pen just stands there like the wind was just knocked straight out of her. She manages a nod. And then later in the scene, it says, and she has to go, otherwise she'd break down and cry right then and there. Colin watches as a heartbroken Pen moves quickly away to come face to face with, and then of course she bumps into Elle.
And again, how perfectly was that translated onto the screen?
I know.
That moment where Colin watches as she leaves, the beautiful harmony between the director and the actor, where it's not really in the script that Colin would sort of watch after her with this really intriguing expression on his face.
Yeah. He brings, like you said, so many more layers to it where you kind of see the foundation for their love story, you know?
Because we've said before that it would be so easy for the show to, and for Luke Newton himself, to have just portrayed it as very heavily apparently unrequited love in season 1 and season 2, where Colin wasn't really, like, he was like friendly with her, where it wasn't deeper for Colin than that because he hadn't realised how he felt. But throughout every single episode and season, right from 101, you have the understanding that Colin on some level reciprocates and that it isn't just fully one-sided. So I think that's beautiful. Of course, as well, in 108, we have talked about some of these moments before in our most recent 2 episodes, I think.
Yes.
So we talked a little bit about how the script confirmed that Pen was yearning after Colin and crying over Colin more than she was crying over her dad.
Well, no, not at all about her dad, only about Colin.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, definitely not. I think it's underlined in capitals, isn't it? Yeah. Not talking about Lord Featherington. Yeah. Rest in peace, Archie, fly high with the angels.
So also in that scene, Elle hilariously pitches the idea of them making a pact to become spinsters together.
Oh, great news.
And Pen is dismissive, and it's very funny. So Eloise says, we should make a pact, Pen, a promise to remain companions as spinsters, old maids forever. And Pen laughs, that would be something, until she sees that Eloise is totally serious. And then Penelope says, something to think about, to be sure.
That's like when someone invites you to a party that you really don't want to go to, and you're like, oh, maybe. Yeah, we'll see.
Yep.
So moving on to season 2, of course. Now, we did cover the heart eyes moment in a past episode, so we can take that off of our little list. Let's hurry on over to 203. One of my favourite episodes, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Lucky, we knew at the time that the original scene, do you know when they're at the dinner table with the Sharmas?
Yeah, in 203.
Benedict is high as a little hot air balloon. But we know that it was originally scripted that Colin was supposed to be high with Benedict. Is that still in the scripts that you saw?
Yes, Colin is indeed high with Benedict, and he also can't stop talking about Greece. There's some cut dialogue there where he kind of launches into another speech about his travels.
Bless him. Season 2 Colin is very me, going on about the travels and nobody gives a shit. Of course, Pen and Colin don't see each other again until 204. A momentous episode for so many reasons. Do you have any little details you're willing to share, Lecky?
Yeah, so just as the Featheringtons arrive, Daphne sees their arrival and tells Violet that she's surprised that they were invited after everything that had happened between Colin and Miss Thompson. So she says, "You continue to astonish me, Mama. Inviting the Featheringtons to stay? I thought you still considered them unwelcome after everything between Colin and Miss Thompson." And Violet says, "What I still consider is the need to be open-minded. Penelope does mean so much to Eloise. And besides, they have a new head of household with a better head on his shoulders than the last, I should hope."
I'm retconning that Violet would have been like, Penelope does mean so much to Colin. I mean, Eloise. She means so much.
Yeah.
Where, like, in her mind, she's like moving the chess pieces.
Yeah. I like that interpretation.
I don't think there's anything too expected in the wooden scene between them.
No.
So what we will do is skip to something that I was wondering about, which is the Colin, Sir Philip, Marina of it all.
Okay. This is really cute for fans of Eloise. The script notes that Philip enters that scene in his foraging gear, which I just thought was adorable. So he's just out foraging somewhere before he meets Colin. And then after the dinner, like the post-dinner scene, the script clarifies that Marina is bored of Philip and Colin's conversation, and Colin is kind of uncomfortable to overhear the exchange between them. So after Marina says, "I'm sure Major Bridgerton did not only go to Greece to see plants," she's
Plants? Was that your RP?
Yeah, that was my Marina. Sorry. It says, "She's trying to be playful, but can't help betray how bored she is by this conversation. Philip nods politely, taking it in stride as Colin blanches, caught in the middle."
Oh, I think in the show that was played, because you know what, the scene is quite heavy when he's at Marina's. You can feel the weight of that. And I think the way that they actually did it in the show, where it is a bit more cutting and a bit more biting. And Philip, I don't think Philip he takes it in his stride, but in quite a sad way.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the moment where Marina is like, "Colin, I can't lay this out for you any easier, mate."
Yes, after she says, "Seek them out because your future will certainly not be found in the past with me." It says Colin takes that to heart, if not a little devastated. And then as he leaves, we see, quote, "a flicker of unhappiness on Marina's face," which suggests that she wasn't as content as she let on, in my opinion, possibly setting up the original book storyline, which of course they may change.
Yeah, absolutely. And our favourite scene, Beauty and the Beast. Did you get any little tidbits from that scene of them on the staircase together? Very awkward in the show.
Yes, so after Penelope says, after seeing Marina, it says, as Colin nods, Pen swallows her very complex feelings about Marina, about how things went between them last season. And then as he's excusing himself in that scene and says, "Pardon me, Pen," it says, as he goes, we're off Pen, reliving the guilt of what she did to Marina as she rethinks her current Lady Whistledown column. Bleak.
That sort of shows the motivation, because you could read that scene as Pen is only really thinking about Colin, but it's the guilt that continues to live with Pen. It's not a decision she made easily.
Yeah.
And it's not something she gets over easily either. It lives with her throughout the whole season. And on a lighter note, 205, the good old feeding the duck scene, Lecky. A little bit of cut dialogue, perhaps?
Yes. So originally, Colin greeted Pen with, "Do not tell me that you've been seized by the wedding fever." Penelope said, "Oh no, but you must admit it is all just a little exciting." Colin then replied and said, "Not according to my brother. Your sister, however, seems happy," which of course was the original introduction for that scene.
Colin was like, "I've checked the schedule. We're not due till next year, babe."
Yeah.
He's like, "I've heard from the showrunners. We're penciled in for season 3.
Yeah.
He's like, "Absolutely not." And then he's feeding the ducks. What's going on in that chestnut head of his?
It says he's clearly still in his head over what Marina told him. But, you know, it's a process. He's getting there, as you know. The purpose scene hasn't happened yet.
And we've said this before at the time. Yeah, there is a pivot. He has to go see Marina to have that closure.
Yeah.
In however he finds that. Episode 5 is him sort of processing that closure, because you don't just get over stuff like that quickly. He needed to sort of readjust. And then what you see from the second half of season 2 is this big turn in Colin and how he's thinking about his future. And speaking of big turn in the Polin story, we did recap in our previous couple of episodes about that cut Polin scene, that infamous 206 scene that then sets up the purpose scene a little bit more. So you can head back to see exactly what that moment was. But speaking of the purpose scene itself.
So after Colin says that your dreams are grander than you let on, Pen, the scene description says that Pen is totally describing her life as Lady Whistledown. And then after Penelope makes her big speech about how, yes, they are mere fantasies, it says Colin looks at Pen as though seeing her in a different light for the first time.
First time. This is the turning point.
I loved this scene description because that is literally what we've talked about for so long. I think maybe even in our 206 rewatch, we felt like this was the moment where he literally starts to see her in a new light. And for that literally to be on the page and to see how well it was translated by Luke in that scene, just perfect.
I love that too, because it would be so easy to allocate that moment to season 3.
It's a slow journey.
Yeah, it is a slow journey. And it was such a pivotal moment for him.
Yeah.
When he says, I'm beginning to believe that now. He's only beginning, guys. It's a journey. You've got to give him some time. And of course, they share that really powerful glance between the two of them, where they're in this world together, just the two of them, before the cake, naturally. The only thing that is capable of interrupting Colin from looking at Pen is to mention that cake's available.
Yeah.
But what's that little moment there, Lecky?
So it says they lock eyes for a swoon-worthy beat before the moment's broken by some light applause nearby.
And then something that we forgot to check when you went originally, and I was like, oh shit, Lecky. The promenade of shame.
Yeah.
Now we had built this up.
Yeah.
This was the stuff of legends.
This will disappoint you. Just prepare to be disappointed.
This is what Homer spoke of.
Yeah.
Amidst his tales of the gods and heroes.
Yeah.
He spoke of the promenade of shame.
Yeah.
And what did Homer speak? I don't know why Homer's involved. Get him in.
Yeah. Okay. It says, at the mention of Marina, Penelope and Colin trade an uncomfortable look. That's it.
That was the only thing you told me when you went, because you were like, I've got so many notes I have to go to. But you're like, I'll give you one thing.
Kind of a letdown.
So I hope that answers the 2 years of mystery.
Yeah, just to reiterate that the acting brings so much to these scenes. And obviously, Nicola and Luke translate so much more than just a discomfort with their eyes and their interaction in that scene. A little disappointing on the page, great in the show.
And it's, again, the script is a starting point. The thing with the script is it has to tell the story, but it has to give freedom for every other team to bring the story to life. It can't be so rigid and prescribed that there's no room for interpretation or directors. Every director on the show could approach this moment and take that moment and have a different conversation with Luke and Nicola about how to bring that to life. But I think, as you say, in the show, they add so many layers along with all those other aspects of storytelling, like costuming or lighting or music.
Yeah, that's a good point. And some people have asked me, about different moments after certain pieces of dialogue. And just, they don't always provide context for what the characters are thinking or like their actions in every single scene. Sometimes it's just dialogue. Sometimes those are things that the actors and the directors have decided upon that aren't on the page. But occasionally we'll get really good nuggets where they will share what the characters are thinking, which we are covering a lot of that. But in general, it doesn't always do that.
Like the races scene in 202, that script actually had been released 2 years ago when the show came out. In that scene, it is very much just back and forth dialogue. There's not a load of extra insights. And interestingly, what you saw in the 202 scene is that, do you know when Colin spots Pen and his face just transforms and lights up and he ditches his
like
friends?
A Christmas tree,
That was supposed to be off screen.
Oh, yeah.
In the script. It was like you heard Colin's voice go Pen, but like you didn't see him. And so the team on the day decided to bring that to life by having the focus on Colin, which adds another layer of storytelling.
Yeah.
But speaking of our favourite scenes, because we love 202, but 207 is a Lecky fave, even to this very day.
Yes.
Do you have anything from your favourite staircase scene?
Yes. So after Colin tells Pen that she has always been so constant and loyal, the scene description says, Penelope looks up at her crush, feeling the weight of her impending Eloise decision. And after she says that she doesn't believe she deserves such praise for her loyalty, Colin eyes her curiously, sees she's all up in her head. And when Colin asks if something is troubling her, Penelope thinks for a beat she'd love to be able to confide in him, but...
I'm sorry, that's like... But season 3, part 2. She'd love to be able to confide in him, but...
But, yeah, and then there's an ellipsis. Yeah.
Just the tagline. Oh. And so what I'd always wondered about that moment is, Portia obviously interrupts the two of them, and Colin adorably makes his escape by being like... I was just here just talking about
entirely personal matters I shouldn't be telling a single unmarried lady.
I wouldn't tell anyone else in the world because it's so personal. However, don't worry about it. And Portia gives him this really curious look after they leave. And people had wondered, was this Portia sort of piecing together that Pen and Colin had more going on in their relationship than she thought? I think season 3 really showed that she was surprised by the neighbour boy. She drags him. So what is that moment then, Lecky?
So it says, he gives her one last knowing look before Penelope bows as Colin leaves. She turns to go herself, troubled even more now, as Lady F thinks for a beat. And then there's an ellipsis. But the thing is, it automatically cuts to the scene where Portia is speaking with Cousin Jack. And that transition implies that Portia is thinking about why Colin was visiting Cousin Jack and not about this moment between Penelope and Colin.
Which again is something that you see in 208 with the gemstone mines in Georgia. You see Portia doing the calculations and the priorities that she has. Her priority in that moment isn't, oh my God, I can get Pen hooked up with Colin here. It's, my priority is the Jack situation, figuring our way out of this. But to move to the season finale, 208... Now, of course, one of our favourite scenes, and that is the sibling moment that opens the episode, where Anthony is really stressed about Kate, so he's taking it out on everyone else. And Anthony exposes that Colin is spending the funds, is he not?
Before I dive into this, I will just say, in case anybody asks, I read this scene, and there's no indication that Colin suspects that Eloise is Lady Whistledown when he makes that kind of pointed comment about Lady Whistledown. Sorry, it's not in there. But as he's speaking with Anthony, after he says, if you must know, I was exploring an investment with Lord Featherington, there was a cut line of dialogue where he said, I needed proof of funds.
That's interesting, Lecky, because the debate has raged about whether Colin actually invested his money or not in the scheme and actually lost the money. I think this, that cut line of I needed proof of funds, shows that like the reason he had to like get the money to start with was to prove it rather than to actually invest it.
Yeah. I think he withdrew it, but did not give it to Cousin Jack.
Now, Lecky, the breaking news of the week, the most important. Do we have any updates on the staffing issues in Bridgerton House?
No, beyond what Colin already said in the script. He does not take note of staff changes. Yeah, sorry, no.
Are you telling me that he still doesn't care? I was really hoping that there was going to be a cut paragraph where Colin is like, Anthony, please tell me how they're doing.
Yeah, there's a cut lecture where Anthony is telling Colin that he should have taken more note of staffing changes.
Heartbreaking. And Colin feels a little bit embarrassed about being exposed in front of his family. But speaking of Colin getting invested in their schemes, what else is Cousin Jack up to?
Okay, this is one of my favorite things I discovered from season 2. There is a cut scene from season 2 between Portia and Pen. It's absolutely hysterical, but basically Portia is trying to see if Pen would be interested in moving to the Americas, and she's basically bringing up things you can find in the Americas. She's like, they got maple, and Pen instantly guesses this has something to do with Cousin Jack, which is, I think, why they cut it. It's a little on the nose, but it's so Portia. So let me just go into this just really quickly. So at the beginning of this scene, she's holding up bouquets and she's like planning the Featherington ball. And she says to Penelope, yellow or green? Before you answer, know that either will be dipped in gold leaf. Penelope nods, taking that in. And Penelope says, both then? And it says, Portia considers her flowers genius. She starts to go, but before she does, she turns back and says, do you like it here, Penelope? And Penelope's like, here? And Portia says, London, you are always reading your precious books. Do they not make the rest of the world seem more interesting? And Penelope says, I have grown quite restless here, in fact, with very little to do. And Portia says, I cannot help you there, but did you know there is sugar from maple trees in the Americas? And Penelope's like, the Americas? And Portia says, a change of scenery would not be a bad idea, would it? Pen eyes her, thinking, does this have to do with Cousin Jack and his mines? And Portia's like, of course not. And Penelope says, his marriage to Prudence then? And Portia says, no, so many questions, child. And Penelope says, did you not just come in here with questions of your own, Mama, being kind of bratty? And it says, and now Portia fixes her with a look. Teenagers. And Portia says, do you know what gets you into difficulties, Penelope? Your wit. You are far too clever for your own good. It will catch up with you one day. Judging from your number of suitors, it already has. And she goes off, Penelope wondering if she's right.
First of all, having just received a massive box of Trader Joe products from an American, I can confirm maple. I had some incredible maple fudge. So I'm signing up. Just absolute chaos, as always, the Featheringtons. I can imagine Polly Walker and Nicola doing the scene to perfection as well.
I love it. My favorite bit is the trying to decide which color for the bouquets, but they're both going to be dipped in gold anyway. So Penelope's just like, just do both of them. And Portia's like, of course, that's the perfect answer. Yeah.
You genius. I also think that extra little bit when Portia turns on her, when she's like, what your issue is, Pen? Because she highlights that it's Pen's wit. You're far too clever. And that's what's affecting the number of suitors. Portia thinks that her wit and her biting is what's putting them away, which is an interesting setup for what we'll see in season 3.
It's just a very similar dynamic between them in season 3, where you realize is that Portia she knows that her daughter is clever, but she's never even put together that she could possibly be Lady Whistledown, and she's so dismissive of her and just sees her as kind of like a bratty teenager. Kind of like the scene in 304 where she's like, don't read the book. Devlin's coming over. You can't be yourself.
Yeah. But as we'll see later, Portia knows that they're so similar to one another, and I think that's the friction. It's fire and fire going against each other. Lecky, some things on my mind as it has been all week. We left Anthony and Colin on a difficult moment.
Bleak stuff.
Can we find any resolution between the two of them?
Yes.
Thank God.
So there was a cut exchange between them before the Featherington ball, where basically Anthony tells Colin that he can invest in whatever he wants. So just a little nugget of information.
He's like, spend away, babe. Do what you want.
Yeah, he's very apologetic. It's kind of like in season 1 where he apologizes about their argument over Marina. This scene was him apologizing for basically infantilizing Colin about the money issue. So after Ben and Elle head off, Anthony says, looking smart tonight, brother. And Colin, he's kind of in a bad mood and says, no notes on how tight to tie my cravat.
I wish that had been kept in.
Yeah, you can hear Luke saying that line in his kind of just like sarcastic Colin voice. And Anthony says, I apologize for interrogating you about your investments. You are a grown man and may do as you please. Colin nods. Yes, well, perhaps you'll be able to watch me grow even more tonight. He heads in, a man with a plan. And Violet squeezes Anthony's arm, sharing a nod with her eldest before they follow Colin into the ball. So obviously she approved of that little apology.
Oh, I think that's sweet. I mean, I understand why it was taken out because it's a little bit unnecessary, but I like that that's the resolution to Anthony seeing Colin as a grown man, which I think we didn't quite have until season 3.
Yeah, we thought that was going to be explored more in season 3, but kind of in this cutscene, you see that was actually resolved at the end of season 2.
Oh, Anthony does like an apology sometimes, doesn't he? And he's like, spend to your heart's desire. And Colin pockets that knowledge and he's like, okay, I'll use my trust fund to bribe Ray the first half of season 3. That's absolutely fine. Let's go. He is concerned with some staffing issues, Lecky.
Just not the Bridgerton staffing issues. Paying other maids.
You know what? He's a man with a plan. He is going to end up being the head of the Featherington household.
That's true.
He needs to show more concern for their house, which is why he's always there.
There are staffing issues.
Yeah, he's very concerned with his future home. Oh, of course, 208, the end dance. Is there anything here, really?
Cressida's aroused during that moment.
I don't know that I needed to know that. Great for Cressida.
Little nugget for Cressida fans. Apparently, she is aroused when Colin is kind of handling her necklace during their dance. And Cressida nearly swoons as the dance comes to a close.
I mean, who wouldn't be? And Pen all but freaks. So, of course, Colin takes Penelope's hand and they leave the ballroom. And we've said before that there's a cut moment that you can see the behind the scenes, or not even a moment, but like a beat that we weren't sure whether ever was intended to be in the show, where when he walks away with her, you can see other members of the Ton slightly reacting. So in the clip that we saw, you could see Ben and Violet sort of reacting, as well as other people. And we had wondered, did anyone notice them leave? And do we have an answer, Lecky?
Yes, so Portia noticed. It says, off a confused pen being led away, just as Lady F catches sight of this. So she did notice.
And that is why she went to the room.
Yep.
Now, speaking of one of my favourite scenes, Gemstone Mines, Colin leads Pen into a private room. How does Pen react to, because there's been so many memes about Pen in that moment where she's like, oh my God, what is about to happen?
Yeah, there was a great one on the sub where they said, Pen thinks she's about to get railed, alas, just fam scandals. And that's kind of the vibe on the page here.
Just fam
says,
scandals.
Colin shuts the door behind them and Pen is freaking the fuck out, still confused, but also titillated AF. TBH. So titillated as fuck, to be honest.
Totally titillated.
And then, of course, after the Georgia comments, it says she stops, say what?
So Pen and Colin leave, of course, and Jack tries to persuade Lady Featherington to flee to the Americas with him. There was just a tiny little cut moment here that just made me smile.
Yes. So Jack says, or he's telling Portia that her daughters can come with them. He says, though I'm certain it will be hard to convince them of a midnight flit to the southern states. Are they particularly sensitive to mosquitoes?
I love that. I love that. It's toughest priorities. Do we need to like pop my boots and get some insect repellent or... So after the scene with Portia and Jack, we catch up with Colin, who downs a drink, never having felt so alive, just as Pen catches up to him, and he whisks her to the dance floor. Pen looks around. Is this really happening? This is really happening. And then towards the end of 208, we're heading straight into catastrophe. They have their lovely little dance together, and Colin looks into her eyes, and as they hold each other's look a beat too long, or at least what seems a beat too long to Penelope, Pen has to break the intense eye contact, and that's when she sees the Lord Squad staring at them.
And laughing.
And you know what? The script doesn't say the word fife at any point, so not my fife.
In fact, I don't remember if it said that they were chuckling in the script either, but Nicola told us that they were, so I believe her.
And then we have previously touched on the wildest fantasy scene where it was confirmed that Colin was drunk, and we talked a little bit about what was going on in his head at that moment. So you can visit a past episode for those details. But then the end of season 2, one of my favourite scenes from the entire show, to be honest, where you have Pen heartbroken at her window before going and choosing to pick up her pen.
So it says, on a heartbroken, embarrassed, angry, and scared Penelope Featherington, she's staring out her window towards Bridgerton House. I thought that was neat because it kind of clarifies that she's looking at the Bridgerton House, considering its significance in season 3. But it continues on when they cut back to her at the window. It says, and as Penelope's resolve seems to harden, as she moves away from her window and over to her desk, she finds a quill, some paper. She knows she has nothing left. Her best friend gone, her crush gone, but she also knows she has the one thing that no one can take away from her, her pen. So she takes hold of that quill, and then Lady Whistledown's voice begins. And it says, and as Penelope puts that quill like a dagger to that paper, scribbling away, and then we kind of hear the closing Lady Whistledown for the episode, and it says, off Pen's sly smile.
I love that. And that is perfectly captured by the show, where she's lost everything, but she still has herself and her talent, and that's what she leans back into in that final moment.
But there was actually a cut Benedict little scene here in the epilogue, some cut dialogue between him and Tessa. After he closes his art kit, he actually gives his art kit to Tessa, basically telling her that he's giving up on his art. So he tells her, forgive me, I needed to be rid of these things, and I thought you might want them because they never belonged to me. I did not get into the academy on my own merits. And Tessa says, an artist does not surrender at one hint of rejection. And Benedict very sadly says, even more proof I am no artist then. And then off her look, it says, I've been told I am someone who sees what others need, and what I see is that you are a great talent, of which I hope to see more. Very heartbreaking.
Oh, Ben, that's sweet that what Anthony says to Benedict really resonates with him. I feel like the reason it was cut ultimately is because what you have in that final cut is that it becomes this really powerful building montage as all the stories erupt, and you can't interrupt that for extended dialogue. I know that we're going to talk about Benedict a lot more in the next year or so.
Yeah, we'll probably come back and talk about that conversation again
as we get updates. But yeah, I do love that. And hopefully he finds his way back. Just before we move on to season 3, we have a final conundrum to look at, the epilogue. Lecky getting the TARDIS with free falling through the time vortex on this one. When they're setting up the epilogue, they don't date it per se, but there is an intriguing moment where they're setting up, like, the entire family's there. You've got Daphne, Lady Danbury, and a 2-year-old Augie. How the hell
I don't know.
Is Augie?
I don't know.
2 years old in the epilogue. I can't even, because, right, Daphne and Simon were together, like, trying for a kid at the end of season 1, which would have been, like, August 1813. So Augie couldn't have been born until, like,
I don't know.
Late spring?
I think I've said I don't know 8 times now. I'm not sure.
So Augie's 2 years old, basically.
I'm not sure. The detail I liked from this is the scene description also says, a bee buzzes past frame, happily not bothering anyone, as we find the entire Bridgerton family, outside. And then after Daphne says her 6 is nothing when you are a newlywed comment, it says that a nearby Colin grimaces. And I was like, oh.
I'm glad that was cut because I don't think that Colin would.
Yeah, he's a romantic.
And you can see him in the show, he's like...
Yeah, he's a little happy little romantic.
And he like taps his little palm mallet like he's really chuffed.
Satisfied. Yeah.
With how season 2 went out. So yeah, I'm glad that was sort of interpreted slightly differently, which leads us, deep breath, Lecky Marique.
I've almost drank my whole Grecian cup. I might have to get some more.
Lecky has a Grecian cup and I have a Wicked cup. We didn't say we'd seen Wicked. Should we have a little Wicked interlude?
Oh, Wicked was great. We've seen Wicked. Jack was great. Johnny was great. Everyone was great.
So Lecky, 301. Now, the thing is with 301, the script itself will probably be released to the public at some point.
It might not be 301. I'm hoping it's 301. It could be any episode that they submit for awards consideration. So they might do Romancing Mr. Bridgerton or something like that where there's more, you know what, it'll probably be Joining of Hands or something like that where there's like a lot of drama. I don't know. Hoping for 301. It's my fave. So what's not my favorite, however, is that one of my favorite scenes, of course, in 301 is the moment where Penelope is watching Colin arrive home and greet his family. And there's been some debate about whether or not Colin saw her. So it says that as Penelope is peering over at him, Colin turns and seemingly looks right at her. But as quickly as he looks over, he looks away, not noticing her. Pen's face falls. And I just have to say, not my Colin. If you can defend a 5, then not my Colin. This is why an interpretation of the scene is important. And, not everything translates from page to screen. And I firmly believe that in the show, he did see her. And that's just what I choose to believe.
What I think was captured about this dynamic in the show is that I think we're in Pen's perspective so heavily. We are with Pen in that scene, right? I think you see Colin turn and look at her. We've talked about this. And I think he does see her. But he's immediately pulled back by his family because, he's got fucking thousands of siblings. So he's pulled back, distracted by them, but having seen Pen and having wanted to sort of reach out a bit more. But I think it's important that Pen thinks that he doesn't notice her. She feels unseen in that moment. And it says as Pen steps out of the sunshine, returning to the shadows she's grown accustomed to, before we cut to the next scene. I think a lot of episode 1 is Pen thinking that Colin has come back, this different person who doesn't see her, who ignores her.
That's a good point, yes.
Who is flirting and who's changed. And even when he comes up to him, goodnight, Mr. Bridgerton, Pen doesn't see that Colin was really worried about her and abandoned his friends because he was like, I need to go check she's okay. Pen doesn't see that. And so the interpretation she has is really important for us as viewers to feel as well. And that what we realise is that Colin does care. And what we see across the season is that he cared so much, but felt really rejected by her in a way. So he does feel vulnerable when he comes back about his relationship with Pen because she hasn't been writing to him. So I think my final interpretation of the scene is that Colin did see her, did look at her and want to sort of, he wouldn't have gone over in that moment because
he's with his family, he's just greeting them.
You can't. He's with his family. But I think what's important is that Pen thinks he didn't notice her. I don't think that he didn't. I think it's her interpretation. So Colin, we're with you, babe. We should cover a lot of episode 1 in a past episode, so we won't go over it again now. But one thing I can't remember if we did cover, Lecky, which is your favourite scene up the whole show, is the handshake when Pen and Colin decide on their plan. He gives her a hearty handshake, one that will send these two forward into new territory, launching them towards their romance, all unbeknownst to them at this moment, of course. And Colin says, I shall see you soon. And there is that moment where it's captured so well by the lighting team cinematography, where Pen leans back and breathes for the first time. Can you give us a little bit more insight into that moment?
So it says, as Pen nods and Colin goes, Pen steps out of the shade for a moment, into the sunlight, letting it soak her skin, hopeful for the first time in a while. She grips the hand Colin shook, living for this feeling until, and then of course Prudence interrupts her.
Is that whistle down?
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful parallel because the scene we were just talking about where Colin arrives, Pen is standing in the sunlight and she goes back.
And she steps back into the shadows. Yeah.
Back into the shadows. We're here with this moment with Colin. She allows herself to be in the sunlight and to let it soak into her.
Believing again that he is the person she believed him to be. Yeah.
I think that's so lovely. So 302, again, we've talked extensively about during our 302 rewatches. So they're all there waiting for you, which brings us to 303. Now, we will go into this and all the future episodes a lot more when we're going over them in our rewatches, so we can really talk and dive into why we think things were cut or how it would have changed things or the insight that the description provides. So the dream.
We talked about this before.
There are a couple of extra beats or extra lines from the whole scene.
Yes.
We have covered one or two of them previously, but just to sort of contextualize them a little bit more. So we find Penelope standing in the spot where she and Colin last met, but this time the night is bathed in a thick mist. Torches light the way as suddenly, in a swirl of fog, Colin emerges. Penelope says, Colin, and he offers her a little bow, which I don't think
he does that. No.
Final?
No.
We love a little Colin bow. And Colin says, thank you for meeting me, but there is a little cut moment here, isn't there, Lecky?
Yeah. So he asks her, did you have trouble slipping away? Kind of hinting that he envisioned this secret tryst between them. And it says, Penn looks back to the sleeping house and says, I was able to escape unnoticed.
In his little fantasies.
She sneaks out to meet him.
A little illicit affair there. And as we know, when Colin says that his entire thoughts have been consumed by, and he can't quite say it, it says he can barely look her in the eye, Penelope stiffens, and Penelope has to prompt him by saying, by what? Finally, he looks up, staring deeply into her eyes. So in the show, as we know, he says, by our kiss, by you.
And then he says, in the original script, he adds, all I can think of is doing it again, embracing you. So he was specifically thinking about embracing her again, which I think is why we see that there's kind of an awkward cut in the dream. If you notice, they're kind of talking, and then the next time they come back to them, he's literally holding her in an embrace.
Yeah.
So I think in the original scene, that's when he moves to do that. So that's why that cut seems a little unnatural if you're focusing closely.
All I can think of is doing it again, embracing you. I think this was cut just because I don't know that I think we feel that without it, without needing the exposition of it. Like, it's conveyed really well.
Yeah.
And a description that I really like that we'll talk a lot more about in our rewatch is when Penn says, you occupy my every thought. It says, a moment as Colin basks in the mutuality of their feelings. And in so many ways, episode 3 is so much about Colin dealing with the issue of reciprocity. And it's a reciprocity that he finds at the beginning of the episode in his fantasies, that he struggles to grasp or even comprehend where she is on that level for the whole of the rest of the episode, until it prompts him to try and go speak to her at the end of the Innovations Ball. And of course, we mentioned before about the moment about Colin wanting to teach Penelope. So he said, our lessons are so many things I've yet to teach you. If you would like to learn. Penelope is overcome with emotion, and she says, teach me. They begin to kiss, passionate, that embrace that we see in the actual show. So in the show, when they do kiss after Penelope says, you occupy my every thought, they have the sort of blurry montage where we start to realise that amidst this passionate embrace, Colin is starting to wake up and that this is all a dream.
Right.
However, in the original script, there is an extra little cut moment, isn't there, Lex?
Yes. So Penelope breaks the kiss and says, wait, might someone see us? And Colin, that's when he says, do not worry, it is just us. It has only ever been us. And then they kiss again. And then he wakes up.
So Colin, in his little fantasy, is dreaming of Penn slipping out of her house, in the original script, of course, dreaming of Penn slipping out of her house, and has Penn continuing to worry about the two of them being seen together.
Yeah.
And he's like, don't worry about it, babe.
Assuring her it doesn't matter,
I've created a world just for us right here, right now. And I don't want to talk about it too much because I know that we'll go into it more in 303, but I spent a lot of time thinking about this moment because I know a lot of people really love the line, it is just us, it has only ever been us. And I think that's just a stunning line in general, but I think I've decided after reflecting about it that I get why it was cut. This shows an awareness for Colin in his dream, because we have to remember, is the rest of the episode, everything that Colin experiences in his dream sets him up for the rest of the episode. It's playing on repeat again and again and again in his mind, as the scene descriptions continue to say. I think had Colin said it is just us, it has only ever been us, I think it almost gives him a bit too much clarity immediately, that I think we need to see him struggling throughout the episode to reach that conclusion.
The moment at the Innovations Ball, yes.
Where he's like, I understand that it's just us and that's all that's ever mattered, and it's too late. So I feel like him having that clarity would have diluted how much he then grapples with it in scenes like the Willow scene.
I see what you're saying, but I will just point out that it is a dream. So if they had let it in, you could argue that his subconscious is recognizing things that he has not yet accepted himself in the waking world. Plus, Luke would have crushed it. So I would have loved to see him recite these words.
Yeah, it is sad. We'll ask what the others think when we record. And when Colin awakens from his dream, how is our boy doing?
Yes, so there's some funny scene description here because it says that Colin is, quote, the Regency equivalent of shook, all caps, after the dream. So fun fact, in the original script, it clarifies that Pen is equally shook by her first kiss with Colin. As Lady Whistledown's voice kicks in for the episode, we discover that Penelope hasn't left her house much this week as she's in a house dress, her hair undone. At present, she's perched by her window, her face reflective in the glass, a book forgotten on her lap. Her lips part as she stares out at the Bridgerton house, her mind clearly on the kiss. She then puts her nose back in her book, desperately trying to get her mind off that kiss as it cuts to the next scene.
I like that she is thinking and still indulging and looking out the window, but then she catches herself, which is, again, what Penelope goes through in episode 3. She just tries to repress that moment and just devalue that moment and be like, it didn't mean anything. It's happened. Yeah. But I have to move forward.
Mm-hmm. I have some more thoughts about this we'll talk about during our rewatch. Just won't get into here, but...
Although just a little drop is that Colin in the family scene thinks of his dream as a very non-friendly dream.
Yes. That's so perfect.
That tickled me so much.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that he's there like...
That was very friendly of me.
He's like, I don't know what the word is. And I also like it takes like him like fully embracing her against a wall, like absolutely ravaging her. And he's like, it wasn't friendly, was it?
Yeah.
He's like, you're so nearly there, babe.
I will mention really quickly, after Eloise visits Penelope to basically, say that she doesn't mind if Colin helps her find a husband. In that scene, she mentions she's off to visit a friend. In the original script, they cut to a scene where she was actually at Gunter's with Cressida. And hilariously, Eloise mentioned some of the ice cream flavors at Gunter's, including they have a lemon and maple flavor and even a Parmesan cheese flavor, which is kind of gross. But what is interesting to me about this scene, Cressida asks Eloise to help her find a husband in this scene, kind of taking in her brother's footsteps.
Bridgertons have been fully recruited this year.
I know, right?
Of course, the beloved Willow scene, Lecky. So what's interesting about the script is that it shows that the scene outside of the Willow is the original scene.
Right.
However, everything underneath the Willow was reshot. We find Colin, who's out getting some air to clear his head, which is the most direct interpretation of Romancing Mr. Bridgerton in the entire show, because that boy is always walking around, getting air and doing some thinking.
Yeah.
And it says he's doing his best to ignore his own set of whispers because these whispers are following both him and Pen in this scene. And he walks towards Pen from the opposite direction. He suddenly spots her. The two both turn ashen, flustered to see one another for the first time since that kiss. As they come nearer, the whispers intensify, and I love this, until Pen ducks behind a tree and Colin follows after her. That'll quell the whispers, won't it?
Yes. Oh, God.
I think one of our Patreon members was like, the magic Willow Tree. Where nobody can see.
Where nobody can see you, yeah.
They're both like, how the hell do we stop these whispers? I've got a great idea. Yeah. Let's get under a willow tree together without the maid.
Yeah.
And as Colin says good day, it says it's awkward as hell because of the kiss in Colin's dream. There's a nervous, sensuous energy here that can't be denied. But boy, are they trying to deny it. And the script says there's so many awkward beats. Colin says, it is good to see you as well. The script says, it's so good.
Yeah.
An awkward beat. And it says that he's nervous to be in her presence after that dream. His eyes flicker down to her lips just a moment before he forces himself to concentrate. So the dream is just, I mean, bless him, you can understand how embarrassed he is to be like, oh my God, if you knew what we were doing in my dreams.
About the non-friendly dreams I'm having, yeah.
And it's those lips that he just, and we see this return throughout the episode, that he just cannot stop fixating on her lips.
The kiss just broke him.
The scene keeps flicking between the fact that it isn't exactly what Colin's been hoping to hear.
The scene description emphasizes that what they're saying is what they do not mean. Like, they do not mean what they're saying. So after Penelope says, it is better that you did not, and Colin says, is it? It says, not exactly what he was hoping to hear. And then after she says that we cannot continue our lessons, and they agree, it says, nobody likes this idea. After he assures her that nothing of the nature of their kiss will ever happen again. It says, but at this moment, it feels like they both want it to happen.
And it just says they are so awkward.
Yeah.
Oh, very, very sweet. I can't wait to get into the Willow scene during our rewatch.
Yeah.
How do we leave them though, Lek?
So there is a final look between them, a longing to return to that kiss, perhaps, but Penelope cannot let herself wish for it, and Colin cannot make sense of why he wishes for it. Which I found so funny.
Aww.
Sorry. And it says, after a moment, Penelope spots a mama and a daughter heading their way. So in fact, they could be seen under the willow tree. And it says, keen to escape more whispers, she gives Colin one last look before venturing out. Off Colin, his smile dropping before he goes into full denial mode.
I don't think Colin goes into denial mode in episode 3.
No, I don't think he is either. I think he's just tumbling further and further toward that realization, toward him almost confessing his feelings at the Innovations Ball, which we'll revisit.
Because I think after the kiss, he knows. And the entirety of episode 3 isn't where he's like, do I love her? What is this feeling so sudden and new? He's like, how do I see if she feels the same way? How do I see if the ground has also completely shaken under her? Is she as shooketh as I am?
She is shooketh as I am.
So I like that it isn't Colin trying to bury it anymore, because we don't have time for him to bury it anymore. And we've already sort of spent 2 years with his poor subconscious 6 feet under the ground. So I like that little change. And Penelope in episode 3, we'll talk so much more about it very soon, but she is grappling with it. She does feel changed after that kiss, but she's trying to bury it, because as she arrives at Stowell House, she spots Colin entering behind them. And there's this moment in the script where it says, a flicker of longing before she remembers that dream is dead.
Yeah.
And it's like, if only you knew what the dreams were doing, Pam. There's many words for that dream. Dead is not one of them. I think Colin was feeling vividly alive in that particular moment. But I think that really gives insight into Colin is struggling throughout the episode, because he's like, because his world has completely changed forever. And he's like, how are you not also feeling that this has changed everything? And that sets up so much panic that then follows him throughout the rest of the season, I would say, all the way until episode 6, episode 7, where he doesn't understand how strong Pen feels for him. But we see as an audience that she is struggling with that. But she just is so convinced herself that that chapter has closed and that they're just very good friends. And speaking of Colin, at the Stowell scene, there's that obviously great moment where Eloise says to Colin, you should know I spoke to Penelope. And you can see it in the show that Colin does this double take to Eloise, like, oh my God.
You know.
What the hell did she tell you? You know, because Eloise is like thinking about her friendship, and Colin's like, oh my fucking God, everyone in this planet is thinking about our kiss, because I know I'm thinking about our kiss.
Yeah.
And it says Colin's head snaps towards Eloise, his brain subconsciously wondering if she meant about their kiss. And I thought that was such a fun inversion. I think we spoke about it before when the show came out, but that's a really fun inversion of the book, where after they've kissed, Penelope's speaking to Elle, and Eloise is like, I spoke to Colin the other day, and Pen's like, oh my fucking God, did Colin tell you about the kiss? So I love that sort of like a little inversion there.
Yeah.
So a little later in 303, we head off to the Balloon, of course, at the Innovations Fair. The two of them have a little bit of a moment inside the tent, don't they, Lecky?
The reaction to the little cake moment, it says, as she takes the cake in hand, a bit of powdered sugar or something sticky gets on her thumb, and she puts the finger in her mouth, sucking off the sugar. As she does, Colin is transfixed, watching those lips he's kissed pucker around her thumb. Time fucking slows. Sound goes away. All that exists are her lips and that thumb, and how much he can't help but want his own mouth to be on hers again.
I didn't know where that sentence was going to end there, Lecky. It's like... And I also like that when Pen leaves, Colin is left speechless, but he's at the front of the line to buy something.
Yep.
And there's a cake vendor.
Yeah, in the original script, there's a little cut exchange between him and the cake vendor, where the cake vendor basically asks him if he wants to buy sweets. And it's like off Colin considering, because of course he's Colin. He's thinking about food, and he's also thinking about Penelope and the food that she just ate in front of him.
And what a combination.
Sadly, though, I just want to point out that moment where we actually see him eating the cake. It doesn't point out that he's thinking of Penelope. It just says, find Colin finishing off a large cake as he watches Pen and Debley nearby.
It doesn't specify that it's the same one, which was a really cool detail that was introduced during the filming.
Yeah.
Of course, the crescendo of episode 3 is the Innovations Ball, which is such a huge moment for Colin and Pen, but especially for our lovely pirate. And it's a very loaded scene. It says Colin stutters when he sees Pen. They lock eyes and all of the sound fades. Their gaze is charged and heavy, but with a crowd caught between them, Colin can only stare. And there's that moment where Colin is talking about courage with the ladies, but he's looking straight at Pen. And we know that after his talk with Violet, he builds up the courage that he's talking about to go up to Pen and ask her a question. And the moment between them is broken by Debling. But Lecky, what do we know about that end scene, which is so powerful, where he's utterly transfixed on Pen?
When she says, Colin, finally free of your admirers, he says the way he looks at her, he's not in a joking mood. She asks him if he's well, and he takes a step toward her. Heat, all caps. Pen can feel it. Colin says, there's a question I've been needing to ask you. Pen's breath catches, her longing for Colin resurfacing, a part of her hoping against all reason that Colin might be wanting to ask her something romantic. It's a crazy thought, but it's also crazy the way he's looking at her. Crazy how close they are, how their breath is nearly intermingling, and so she can't help but nurture the slightest bit of hope, especially as she notices his look down at her lips. The intensity of the moment causes Pen's eyes to flicker away, noticing as they do people whispering about the two of them together. Colin follows Pen's look and now sees the eyes of Wilding and Stanton, of the Debs, of the debutantes, all speaking in low tones, and quickly the doubt creeps in for Colin, and that's when Lord Debling interrupts. And I think the reason they cut them panning away and seeing the reaction of the Ton is it almost feels like too reminiscent of that scene in 208, where Pen could almost take it as if he's embarrassed by her, or the audience could take it that way. But that is the reason in the script initially that he chooses not to vocalize his feelings. And I think they did it better in the show, where they edited that out, and instead it's Debling's interruption that prevents him from vocalizing his feelings.
I also think if you told Colin in that moment that they were in a crowded ballroom, he'd be like, what?
Yeah.
He has no comprehension. He is so fixed on Pen. I think the music and the direction of that scene does a really good job of that. I think what's interesting about that ending scene is Pen really starts to hope at that moment.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of explains as well why she does accept his love quite, because we'd always wondered, is she going to find it really difficult to accept how he feels about her? But she's a creature of hope. We've always known this about Pen, but she sees him and she's like, logically, I know that the dream is dead.
Right.
But everything...
But she's noticing the signs.
He's doing.
Yes.
Because she's so good. She knows him so well. And she knows the truth of him so well.
Yeah.
And also, he's there, like, panting heavily, staring at her lips. So, like, she does take some context cues.
Yeah, with his mouth hanging open.
And so, like, she's perceptive. He's, like, just, like, transfixed on her.
She catches on.
Oh. So, of course, these two have a really intense moment on the dance floor where in the final show, it's just the two of them, extreme close-ups before Debling cuts in and he's like, we need to get dancing. There's a funny description where it says Colin is disturbed to see Lord Debling joining them. There's the moment where it says Penelope glances at Colin, wishing she could have one more moment to see what he might say. Colin draws breath, wanting more than anything to say fuck everyone and finally tell Pen how he feels. But he's just not brave enough to do it. And so, tired of waiting for Colin, Penelope turns to Debling, plastering on a smile. She accepts his dance, as we know. And in the description, it says she takes Debling's offered hand, making a choice. So here you see that Penelope wants Colin to have that extra moment. She's waited for him for so long. She knows that he's almost there with something, even if she can't quite allow herself to hope fully for what it is. But the reality is that they've run out of time in that moment. And she is tired of waiting. But I do think it's so lovely that we see that Colin, what he wants to say is, I don't care about anyone else. I just want to be with you. And I need to know if that's how you feel too. That's not how it goes. Pen makes a choice. And how does the episode end, Lecky?
So Colin's heart breaks as he watches them go off together. And then as they're dancing, it says that off Colin, unable to look away, knowing he's missed his chance.
Poor Colin.
Very sad.
Well, 304, how are we doing? Because he is down bad.
Okay, this is actually interesting.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is the rest of it not interesting to you, Lecky?
It's
2 hours in, we finally got something interesting for Lecky.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. This is one interesting detail that I really like is that the flashback scene at the end of 304 initially took place at the beginning of the episode during the scene where Colin and Violet are talking before the Samadani visit. So in that scene, he spots the faint scar on his hand from his injury from the hand cut scene, and he runs his thumb over it. And that's what triggers the flashback of him cutting his hand and remembering that moment with Penelope. And then later later in the episode, when he's sitting next to his lantern, he doesn't have a flashback there. Instead, I liked this better. I kind of wish they'd included it, is the reason he goes to the ball is because he goes to the window and looks over at the Featherington house thinking of Penelope. And it's that sight that motivates him to go to the ball. So let me just read that real quick. We find Colin sat alone in the dimly lit study, staring into space. He's ruminating on Violet's words, a barely touched sandwich by his arm.
Key detail.
I liked that detail. It says, even food is of no interest to him now, so you know it's serious. After a moment, one of the candles flickers out. His hands move to the lantern, encasing the wick, the same lantern he broke in episode 302, the glass now replaced. Another moment before he stands and goes to the window. He stares out across the street to Featherington House, his thoughts on the girl who has always been there, under his nose, there across the square. His face softens, and then he's moving out with purpose.
Oh, I do like that.
I loved it. I wish they'd left that in.
I do like that. I think the parallel of him looking out of his window.
The window.
I
Yes.
think that's really moving.
I know.
I really love 304.
Yeah.
I love how Colin finds his strength to go and be brave in a really difficult moment. But I really love the parallel, and I love the description of, and I think Luke would have captured that so well as he processes the fact that she's always been there.
Yeah.
And he now needs to go get her. So as Colin is busy getting himself ready for his ball, tying his cravat up, obviously Penn and Debling are sharing a dance to one another. There's a really funny little moment here, isn't there? Well, it's not funny. It's bleak. It's absolutely bleak. But in the spirit of dark humour.
There's a couple of funny moments. So Devlin asks Penn if she would like to dance, and the script says Penelope falters. No one has ever asked her this outright.
Now, maybe she'd be better prepared, Colin, if you'd actually asked her to dance instead of just grabbing her at various times of dancing. Or, Penn's like, someone's signing my dance card? I thought they were left intentionally blank. I thought it was an artistic decision here, Colin.
Yeah. News to me.
And as they're dancing together, they obviously had the conversation that we know where Debling is saying, I'm so glad that you've got this full life because I'm going to fuck off with the penguins for the next 3 years of our lives.
Yeah.
And there is a little moment that was added, wasn't there, Leck?
He says he's glad that Penelope has such a full life, and then hilariously adds, and friends like Mr. Bridgerton, who one day shall marry and bring even more friends into your life. Which I'm sure Penelope just loved to hear.
Well, I think that really lingers with Penn because she's trying to bury her love for Colin. Not bury it per se, but she's trying to accept that chapter of her life
It's closed.
isn't going forwards.
Yeah.
And she's trying to convince herself that she can reconcile with this. And Penn thinks while Debling is off travelling, she'll be here watching Colin marry someone else. It's not a happy thought. And that also pains her so much. But I'm glad this was taken out because for a start, I think 304 is a lot about Penelope grappling with the way she views life and what she wants from life on a very big level, not just about Colin, but it's a way that you live, isn't it? So I don't think that Colin needed to be brought up in that moment. And also, I think it works better if Debling kind of is a bit suspicious of them both from the off.
Yeah.
Unless he said that in a way that was like teasing her to get a reaction out of her. I'm glad it was cut.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
But Colin enters the ball and they actually had a little interaction here, didn't they? As it was originally scripted.
Yes, so in the original script, Colin taps Debling on the shoulder before asking if he can interrupt.
And I'm glad this was taken out as well because I think it's so hilarious that throughout the entire show, Colin never says a single word to Debling.
Yeah.
And instead what he does, he sort of gives this like side glare at him the whole time.
Yeah, he positions himself like he's not even looking at him, really.
It's just beautifully done. And then it was also known that there was a tiny little cut moment between Eloise and Colin. We could see it in the behind the scenes that never made the show. Do you have a bit more information about exactly what was said between the two of them as Colin watched Penelope and Debling leave?
So Eloise approaches Colin and says, what on earth is going on? Are you still helping Penelope? She's still...
We're so past
She's
that.
way behind.
She's not caught up with her episodes, as she, bless her.
And Colin says, I cannot talk right now, Eloise. And then she says, Colin, but of course he storms past her. And then there's like a bunch of whispers and stuff erupt. And if you've been following us for a long time, we caught a little glimpse of this script actually way back when, before the show came out. And it says that there were like whispers and the music stopping. And that's actually because Queen Charlotte decided to end the ball when Fran leaves because she's upset that she didn't go after Samadani.
So it wasn't Pen and Colin just leaving.
Yeah.
That explains how Eloise got home so quick. We were always like, how the fuck did Elle get back so quickly?
Oh, yeah, because the ball ends then.
Answers,
Yep.
guys. Now, I think there's a little scene in this episode. It's, you know, a little bit more under the radar, so we thought we'd really bring it to life a little bit because I don't think it gets enough focus. And that is a good old carriage scene. So Pen is in a carriage. She ain't having a good time. But there's a little knock on the door. Who on earth could it be, Lecky?
So it says Pen is in her carriage, trying to hold it together, when suddenly her carriage comes to a stop and there is a knock on the door. Frightened, I didn't realize she was frightened, she looks out to see Colin standing outside, out of breath from running after her. She opens the door to speak to him.
And of course, they have their exchange.
After Penelope says, would you please let us ride home in silence and leave me alone? Colin says, I cannot. Penelope says, please. And it says, Colin breathes heavily, his head swimming, his eyes falling once more down to those lips he's been eyeing all week. And then the words come tumbling out before he can stop them.
God, those lips really did number on him, didn't they?
I know. There's so many mentions of Penelope's lips in this episode, guys. So then, of course, Colin launches into his big romantic speech about the feeling that is like torture, but one which he cannot and will not and does not want to give up. And then revisiting that phrase that we were talking about earlier, it says, Pen is shooketh in all caps. She tries to comprehend what he is saying. And as he continues, it says, another moment as Pen is utterly confounded. She says, but Colin, we are friends. And it's Colin's face changes as he suddenly realizes that he may be alone in this feeling. He is immediately embarrassed. And a lot of people have asked me during Colin's next line when he says, yes, but we, what he was thinking there, that's actually just one line of dialogue. There's no scene description explaining what he's thinking. So he says, yes, but forgive me, I do not know what I was thinking. The next scene description says, Pen watches him and is overcome. It's now or never. Then, of course, she admits she wants to be more than friends. And it says, and at that, all the repressed lust Collins felt comes barreling out of him as he locks eyes with Pen and dives in to kiss her. They hold this kiss deep, passionate, one that contains all the unsaid things and feelings over the past days, weeks, years. When they part, they look at each other with wonder, knowing they have crossed into the unknown, but excited for what it holds. There's still uncertainty there, fear, really. But after a moment, Pen takes a breath and dares herself to do something she's been wanting to do for a very long time. She runs her fingers through Colin's hair.
Because those were Pen's wildest fantasies. That's as far as it got for her.
And it says, in that action alone, seeing Pen take what she wants like that is enough for Colin to finally lose himself in the moment. He kisses her again, and this time his hands roam Pen's body. We're skipping through time here as he kisses down her neck and then fully immerses himself in her décolletage. One hand comes up to grab her breast, squeezing over her dress. As the other hand starts to make its way under her dress, Pen can barely contain her delight. And then, just as their breathing intensifies, their arousal growing, Penelope says, oh, Colin. And then the carriage comes to a halt. Penelope gasps. Colin has not even noticed, so in the moment he is.
I think it's interesting because what you'll notice there is it's a little bit more, I mean, it's very handsy, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But the hand only starts to go up the leg.
Yeah, they don't detail a lot of what we actually see in the carriage scene. So that obviously was something that Luke and Nicola and the director and the intimacy coordinator all probably had a hand in inventing for the scene.
Just the one hand, Lecky.
So then after Colin says, oh God, could the carriage driver not keep on driving? Pen smiles and Colin smiles back, huge smiles. And then the two of them are laughing in disbelief at the utter joy of all this, how good it feels and how strange it is. Eventually, Pen starts to sit up as she comes to her senses. And then after Penelope admits she wasn't paying much attention to anything else that was going on, and says Colin just looks at her, taking in her mussed-up, sex-haired beauty, thinking a moment on what to do next, and then, making a decision, he tucks her hair behind her ear, pulling the shoulders of her dress back up, putting her back in order. So that's obviously, I think, the moment he decides to propose.
Obviously, that's the end of the episode where he's like, are you going to marry me or not? And we never really knew whether Pen actually said yes or not.
Right.
Does episode 5 sort of confirm whether or not she said yes?
It doesn't, but it kind of implies that she didn't even get a chance to answer because it specifies that it picks up right where we left off in the last episode.
It does say, which is translated really well, is that she's in a complete daze and it says nothing feels real, almost as if we're underwater. So everything's super, super muffled. But I think that adds to the idea that maybe she didn't say yes because she just is so overwhelmed in that moment. And I think she just gets swept along in that. Lecky, we know one of the big ones that people have been wondering about is our dear old mirror scene. Did you manage to sneak a peek while you were there?
Yes. So there's actually a cut line of dialogue from Colin's speech in the mirror scene. And I'm actually glad that they cut it. I feel like it's not as poetic as some of the other things he says. So he says, "You're the cleverest, bravest woman I have ever known. In a sea of small minds, you always hold true to yourself. With enough space in your heart to see others so clearly, you make me feel seen in ways I have never felt seen before."
The reason I like that being cut out is because it's like you and I together in that tiny intimate moment, and then his words expand out to society.
That's a good point.
And he says to see others so clearly, and then it goes back in to be like, you make me feel seen. I think having the moment just being kept between the two of us is really powerful. So you're the bravest one I've ever known, and you make me feel seen. It's not about everyone else in that moment. It's just the two of them.
So later in the scene, after Colin says, "and other parts I've been dreaming about," the scene description says, "Pen can't take it any longer. She turns and kisses him hungrily. Colin pulls her flesh against his body, sending shivers down her spine. Their kisses grow downright graphic as desires pool and breath intermingles, self-control crumbling. After Colin says, "You must tell me to stop if you do not wish for this," the hunger in Colin's eyes drives Pen crazy. She says she does not wish for him to stop. In cuts, Colin undresses Pen in front of the mirror, undoing her bodice, running his hand up her legs to help her out of her skirts. Colin notices Pen covering herself and tells her, "Lie down." After he tells her, "You are so beautiful," the scene description says, his confidence encourages her confidence as she now lets herself be fully seen. Colin gently brushes the hair out of her face. He leans down to kiss her, pulling a blanket over them as he does. Pen looks up at him, a bit scared.
That's very true to the book as well, because after Pen sits down, you can see that she's a little bit self-conscious, but it says that when Colin sits beside her on the settee, her confidence grows. And that really ties into the theme of the whole season, that when Pen is with Colin, she feels more herself, she feels more confident in his presence, which it really shows here.
Jumping forward a little bit in the scene, as they're making love, it says, "We can tell from the look on Colin's face that this has never felt so good. And despite this being her first time, Pen is in heaven."
Oh, and then, as you mentioned before, we artfully cut through time so that we know this is no quickie.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's really, really poignant, because obviously the debate about Colin's virginity and everything like that has always gone on. But what is very true to the book here actually is that, yes, he's had previous experience, but this is something new to him, something different to him.
Significant, yeah.
Absolutely.
So after Colin tells off Portia, there's a scene with Varley. There's some cut dialogue in that scene where Varley actually compares Portia and Penelope and points out how alike they are. And there's actually some interesting cut dialogue as well that hints at Portia's own backstory. So after she says, "And how was I to know it was a love match between them? It is certainly uncommon, not just for Penelope, for any of us. I never dreamed of such a thing for myself. And if I did, it was entirely foolish." And then the scene description says, "Some real pain here that she's doing her damnedest to hide." And I really like this because it almost seemed like set up for a Portia spinoff or something.
Oh, I'd so be down for that.
But Varley says, "It makes sense then that you didn't expect it for Miss Penelope. You two are the most alike." And Portia says, "Did I ever tell you that? I did not know I had ever said it aloud."
Oh, I always thought it.
So she always felt that she and Penelope were the most alike.
And that's why she didn't expect Pen to get a love match. It's not because she doesn't believe in Pen. It's because she sees her as like a copy of her, and she's like, this was my path, so I assume that's your path as well.
But Varley continues and says, "It is obvious that they are alike." She says, "You are both clever and strong-willed." And Portia likes hearing the comparison out loud. And Varley says, "I'm certain she will understand you were only trying to protect her. Perhaps you should tell her as much," encouraging Portia to speak with Penelope. And that is the reason I thought that this was cut, because I think they wanted Portia to choose of her own volition to kind of mend things with Penelope and kind of come to that realization herself.
I also think maybe it would have brought that beat too early from 308 where Pen says, "I think we're more alike." I think it would have been a repeat, but I think we needed to hear that from Pen, because that's a big part of Pen coming to terms with her family dynamics.
That's a good point, yeah.
To return to Pen and Colin after the mirror scene, we have talked about this little moment beforehand, but it says we find Pen and Colin still naked under the blanket, glowing after a couple more rounds. So they've had a busy afternoon, guys.
Yeah, a couple more rounds.
A couple more rounds.
Yeah, that's why her hair looks so mussed.
And we mentioned previously in a different episode that this is the beat where they returned to from 302, where Pen had lied about what she'd read in Colin's journals and said that she read about Spain. And here
he reddens and says with a cheeky smile,
"I knew you read that part of my journal." And that's how they get back into the conversation about their writing.
Yeah.
So, Lecky, jumping forward to 306 a little bit then, there is a little bit of cut dialogue when Colin arrives at Featherington House to give Penelope her engagement ring, isn't there, Lek? Because as we know, the night before, she'd collapsed, she'd swooned, and Colin is coming to see how she is. What does he say?
So after she says that her condition might be catching, Colin says, "There is nowhere else I would rather be. I feel partially to blame for your swooning last night." Penelope says, "You have done nothing wrong." And Colin says, "I was interrogating you." So he feels very much to blame for her fainting the night before, which made me very sad.
We see in episode 7 when he's like, "I've been blaming myself this whole time."
Yeah.
And you feel this in that scene here, because when Colin says, "I know there's something you're not telling me," it says, "A longing here as he wishes Pen would reassure him that her feelings for him are as strong as his, but Pen, of course, is only thinking about Whistledown." And when Penelope says, "I can't speak of it now," Colin nods solemnly, a flicker of uncertainty on his face. So the uncertainty in Pen's feelings for him don't just occupy episode 3. They really carry out throughout pretty much the whole of the rest of the season.
Yeah.
Oh, and just a little fact for you about the church scene.
Oh, yeah.
Before we get to the Whistledown reveal.
I also love this.
Lecky, there's a great little nugget in the church scene, isn't there?
Colin is hungover in this scene. It says that when Pen joins him in the aisle, right before their private dance, he flinches because he has a hangover. Yeah.
I'm kind of glad they took that out, because it's a very sweet, very earnest scene. And if he's there, like, absolutely hanging.
Yeah. It says he has a serious hangover.
Yeah, and when he's like, "I'm glad you're well," and she's like, "Yeah, I feel great now," he flinches from his hangover, and she goes, "Are you unwell now?"
Yeah.
That's us on every introduction. It's like, "Have you recovered from your most recent illness?" "Yes, but I'm ill now."
Yeah.
I don't think there was anything too notable about the Whistledown reveal scenes.
Well, there's the funny detail about apparently she was wearing a bonnet, or she was supposed to wear a bonnet that she'd borrowed for one of the Mondridge maids for some reason.
Stolen is the word you're looking for there, Lecky.
Stolen. Yeah. So she borrowed a cloak and also liberated a bonnet from one of the Mondridge's maids. She actually tells Eloise that she's going to do that before she does. I thought that was so ridiculous and so funny, but I understand why they cut it.
I think the only detail from the Whistledown reveal is that there is a dark rage in his eyes.
You can kind of see that. Actually, no, I disagree with that, because I feel like even Luke has spoke about this before, that he was unexpectedly emotional. So I feel like he came in wanting to play the rage, but instead we get that hurt from him.
Yeah. So in 307, it is scripted as it's portrayed on screen. And Colin's just in shock, pretty much. He's just shaking his head in disbelief. But as you say, Luke, when they came to film that, he just couldn't stop crying. And I think that's so true to Colin's character, and it adds such intricate layers to the scene. But yes, that wasn't scripted. And that's a really good example as to how the script is the starting point, and then everything else sort of creates the world around it and adds to it. And a moment like that where an actor takes those words and then performs them in a certain way can really change the tone of the scene and how the character is feeling in that moment. Of course, in 307, one of the big moments, the entrapment scene that so many people have talked about. What did you find there, Lecky?
Colin, after Penelope asks if he's going to call off the wedding, it says that Colin scoffs, frustrated by the predicament they're in. Then, of course, he makes the entrapment line. And then the scene description says, "God, it's a horrible accusation. Pen fights tears." So, yes, the writers did know how heartbreaking that would be for all of us.
I think the scene descriptions really are an important reminder there, because Colin isn't going to call off the wedding. And he's using this as like, we'll talk about it, but he's using his way to her. But he is frustrated by the predicament they're in.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that's conveyed. He at no point wants to end it with her. He at no point is like, "I don't love you anymore." He's just frustrated. And that's how it comes out here. And I think that remembering that so much of how Colin feels really reminds us where he's coming from in those moments. And that he doesn't want to end it, and he isn't just with her because they were intimate. He's just annoyed that they're in this. He's like, everything was so great, and then this has just thrown something into our happiness.
We already discussed that there was also a cut scene between Theo and Eloise, which we will try to provide a little snippet of on Instagram.
Yeah, so as you say, we talked about that. I think the real takeaway from Theo and Eloise's interaction is that there is such a focus on women's rights, and Eloise using her position to be able to enact change, which really sets her up and puts so much in her mind about her future. And that Theo praises that she has a quality that makes people want to listen, that she does have a power within herself to enact change. And it says Eloise smiles, that meaning a great deal to her. And as their conversation ends, the two of them share a smile before Eloise turns to go. And we have a conflicted Eloise thinking on what comes next for her now that one door has shut, but another has opened. And that's a really interesting way to leave Eloise at the end of season 3, really, because season 4 isn't her season, but I think there's going to be so many interesting story beats for her. And I really can't wait to see what becomes of Elle in season 4. But to return to our two troubled lovers, we have, of course, the little modiste hookup scene. So if you've listened to our previous episodes, you know that what preceded this scene was a cut scene where the Lord Squad tried to trick Colin into getting with Ambrosia, but Colin wasn't interested and he walked out. And so we find a drunk Colin who's making his way home through the night in his feels. Once again, Colin walking around in his feels, very but Colin. And he's shocked to come upon Penelope, who's just left the Modiste. And they have a loaded stare that sobers them both. And then what follows is their interaction as it happens in the show. I think what the script really reiterates is that there's so much hurt in this moment between the two of them. But when Colin says all the damage you have done, Pen takes a moment accepting his rightful anger. And that's something that really translates in 307, is that Pen at no point is like, you've got no right to be pissed off with me.
She's not defensive. Yeah.
She gives him the space. She gives him the space to be angry.
Yeah.
And it's like, good to hear an apology when Pen says she's so sorry, Colin's so snarky. Like, that's the scene description.
Funny.
And again, touching on what Pen recognises about Colin in this moment is when Colin says, then what good am I to you? Pen's still seeing the vulnerability beneath his anger, which is such an important characteristic of how Colin feels. And that's what prompts her to say, I love you, Colin. I love you, which is something he has been so needing to hear from her. And with that, Colin's expression melts. Suddenly all that exists is the heat between the two of them. And before long, they both simultaneously lunge towards the other. Their mouths meet, devouring one another. It's intense, hungry, full of need. Colin presses Penelope up against the wall of the alleyway. His hands reach up under her skirt. The both of them grasping for ecstasy. But before they can get too far, the sound of, and then this is in capitals because it's like a cue, hooves clomping nearby. And then that's when Colin leans into action and sort of covers her over to protect her. But it says that even though they stay still, there's a heat even in the midst of danger as she's pressed up against his chest and soaks in the smell of him.
Very Antony of
she's
her.
She's going to turn into Antony there. Yeah. And they share this moment of deep longing before he puts her into the carriage and they say goodnight.
After the final look between them, as Penelope is leaving in the carriage, she's feeling a sliver of hope.
I'm glad someone is like... But it's, you know, we've got a wedding to get to, haven't we? And so many people wanted us to check on the wedding scene and see what was in there. When they're walking down the aisle, Pen is so nervous. This is such a huge moment for her. She's literally in the spotlight and she isn't worried that Colin's not going to marry her. She's just sort of overwhelmed in the moment. And it says, and then Pen's eyes find Colin's at the front of the room. And to her surprise and relief, the look Colin is returning is reassuring, seeing her fear and telling her, you can do this. And she does. One foot in front of the other. Oh, Pen and Colin are uncertain as they look into one another's eyes, and yet there is hope here. And that's when they have their exchange of vows. So the nod isn't explicitly in there, but that connection between them is definitely there. And that is the wedding, isn't it? It's bittersweet because it isn't the happiest of circumstances, but it's two people recognising that they can do this together.
Yeah.
But of course, Lecky, all is not well that does not end well, as they have their reshot argument. So we don't have the original, but we think it was reshot because the original had Cresta listening in on them and they changed the direction that took in the show. But the only little detail really here of note, I think, is when Pen says, Colin, it is our wedding night. Colin nods, wishing this felt different.
Same, Colin.
Yeah. He's like, tough shit. And poor Pen is devastated. But it does note that when Eloise hugs Penelope, the old friends hold each other finally and fully bonded. So this is the moment of
coming back together.
This is it. Yeah, they're done. Yeah. They're back together. And then Eloise goes, it'll be all right, it will. And then it goes off Penelope, seriously doubting that right now. She's like, I'm not convinced, Elle. So episode 8, Lecky, the good old finale. We know that their wedding night doesn't go great. We know that the rest of it doesn't really go great. And the two of them still feel the connection, but they just can't quite reach out to one another and find each other again. And there is that moment, of course, where Colin goes into their bedroom to get a blanket and he sees the shoulder.
The hot shoulder moment.
The hot shoulder moment. Do we have any little insights into that moment there?
Yes, so it says, Colin nods and presses into the bedroom where he catches sight of Penelope's bare shoulder just as she pulls her nightgown over her underdress. A pang of longing as he and Penelope lock eyes. A heated moment, the two of them feeling their old connection, smelling their familiar scents.
God, Anthony would love this episode. Yeah?
Anthony all over again. And just before it looks like one of them might give in, Colin's pride and anger forces his eyes away. And then it says, as Colin grabs the blanket and goes off, we're off a heartbroken Penelope, alone in the shadow of her room.
She's back in the shadows, mate.
I know.
So we're approaching the end of the season.
Yeah.
We're in the dying moments. And of course, the resolution is Penelope's speech at the bug ball, the butterfly ball, the Finchworth Dankworth. The Finchworth Dankworth?
Finchworth sounds pretty good to me.
The Finchworth ball. And what I love in the script is that as she is saying her speech, we see what we see in the show where she finds different characters to focus on to draw her strength from. And she finds her mother gaining a bit more confidence. She finds Eloise, and with her, more strength. A glance to the Queen, at her sisters. And then after she says that it takes courage to live life in the open, Penelope finds Colin again, his eyes welling with pride and understanding. It's as if the rest of the room fades away and she speaks directly to the man she loves, where she says to honour one's weaknesses and mistakes publicly for all to see, and to know regardless of the outcome, one always has worth. And they have their reconciliation. There's nothing too much to sort of bring up there that wasn't in the show, but there is the little Michaela introduction though, of course, isn't there, Lecky?
Michaela introduces herself, and it says, on a mesmerized Fran, instantly taken with Michaela. She has no idea what she's experiencing at the moment, but she knows it's something powerful, primal, new. And then after she stumbles over her name, it says, was that Fran stumbling over her name like Violet did when she met Edmund? As everyone smiles at one another and Fran quietly panics over what she's feeling, we hear, and then it gets into the Lady Whistledown voiceover. So she was definitely feeling feelings.
What is this feeling so sudden and new?
Indeed.
But that's a story for another day, is it not, Lecky? Because we have reached the final moments of season 3. I can't believe I forgot what season it was.
So to jump forward to the epilogue.
Yeah, or the coda, as they call it in the script. Sadly, we don't have the name for the little Lord Featherington.
Sorry.
The jury is still out. Placey votes Thomas or Elliot. So there weren't any extra details from the epilogue. I think what is interesting about the epilogue, though, is that at the ending, it's under this, the family banters, snatches the column from each other, plays with the babies, laughs, talks, gossips. The Bridgertons and the Featheringtons truly united. Endings close on the printed words, yours truly, Penelope Bridgerton.
Yeah.
I really love that sort of mingling of the families at last, you know, closing the circle that we found them in 101.
Yeah.
What's interesting in the script is that it isn't explicitly written that Pen and Colin go to stand by the window. I really love that was added by Tom Verica and the team as a way to close out that theme that we've seen, not just in season 3, but throughout the whole of the story.
Yeah.
And at some point in our rewatch, we're going to do a window count of the whole season. And I love that moment. So that's sort of season 3, really. As I say, there are other little bits and pieces that as we go through our rewatch we'll bring in, but those are kind of all the big points that we really wanted to raise. And I think it's been fascinating to go through and to see cut moments or moments where it was written on the page in one way and we see how the teams created a slightly different version, or just to sort of see the scene as it was and to hear the intentions behind the decisions that were made.
Or the original intentions.
The original, yeah.
Because sometimes the execution was a little different than they anticipated.
Absolutely. And I think it's such an important reminder about storytelling, because these stories started off as books, as we know. And every process of that is a new part of the storytelling until we get the final version as it appears on our screen. So I don't think we should view the scripts as sort of like a Bible that can't be deviated from, and I don't think these are how they're written or how TV or film works, where a script is written and therefore cannot be deviated from.
Right.
It's a form of storytelling. It's a part of the journey. And it's sort of a middle step where here's the framework, this is the story we're telling, and then it gives that over to the teams and it's like, go make this story, but interpret it, have freedom, have collaboration, because we know from speaking with people who worked on the show how much collaboration there is involved and how much different departments are able to tell stories with their work.
Yeah.
So I think that's just an important reminder. And when moments are cut from the show, it's not us losing content, it's us having a better story,
right?
A story that's more considered in how it's being told. So it would be easy to have every single scene, but what we have is a considered story.
Yeah, because editing is equally part of the storytelling process as writing is.
I mean, we know this firsthand from how much we edit our episodes. We're not just cutting stuff out, we're trying to tell the best version of the story that you possibly can. So if we go on tangents or if we talk about things that aren't necessary, we refine it because we want to tell the best story that we can. And that's kind of what the editing process is as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So the script is part of that. And we'll talk about that in our 303 rewatch, because the Willow scene, for example, never was scripted to be under a willow tree. The Willow Tree came from the location team finding that place. And then finding a location like that allowed Andrew Arn, the director, and the actors to then think about how they're going to frame that and what the Willow Tree could then symbolise to that story. So it's a story that is continued to be told throughout the pre-production, production, and then post-production process, all the way until it reaches our screen. So I know we're going to talk about all of these moments in far more detail as we go through over the next few months, Lecky. But on behalf of us all, thank you so much for heading all the way back to the library.
You're welcome. We have more details to share that we couldn't cover here, but it's almost 3 hours into our episode, so we will be saving some further details.
Yeah, but these are all the main points, and we will share the screenshots that we can on our socials, so you can go check those out. But I hope you've enjoyed this little episode, a little walk down memory lane as well from the past year, because what an incredible year it's been, and then reflecting back on this story that we love so, so much. So thank you for joining us this year as we've tried to tell our version of the story. Lecky, what a time, eh?
What a wrap.
What a wrapper.
To this episode.
Lecky is going to go play some more Whitman string quartet. I always feel like that when you get wrapped, it's like a New Year's resolution where everyone like promises to like change their wraps next year.
Yeah, I'll go off and listen to Chandelier a bunch to make up for it not being my top song this year.
Absolutely disgraceful. My top song was randomly Taylor Swift, LOML. I clearly had a bad patch there at some point. I don't really remember.
Mine was, I mentioned earlier, the band Black Lab, the unplugged cover of their song Time Ago. It's a good song. In fact, all of my top songs, by the way, were songs I was considering for Polin edits. So, oh well.
Yeah, all the songs on mine came from my Polin playlist. Let's not lie. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone who has listened to us this year, whether you listened just the once or whether we were your number one podcast, whatever it was. We appreciate you all so much, and we hope you all have a wonderful festive season. As I say, you will hear from us again. I don't know when, maybe not too long now. We've got a little episode up our sleeve, shall we say? But until then, Lecky Merrick, where can everyone find us?
You can find us at Barb Pod on Instagram and TikTok. We are also on YouTube if you like viewing beautiful collages. And if you just like to listen to us with your ears, we're available on basically every podcast platform.
And you can also support the pod over on Patreon, where we will be holding episode discussions, episode votes, all sorts of things going on over there. So you can find us in our show notes. But until then, Beans, do us the honour and sing us out.
Das violin. Do 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 do. Do 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 do.